You're listening to a very special episode of the Fitness Business Podcast. Coming up today is your short course on the 7 pillars of predictable sales success, presented by our expert guest, Jason Stowell. Welcome to the industry's leading business podcast for fitness owners and managers. We'd like to thank this month's premier podcast partner, Team Rockstar Fit. Team Rockstar Fit is the award-winning mastermind group for women in fitness to expand their careers online in partnership with Beachbody. Don't get left behind in the industry. Get support, get online, and get ahead. Visit teamrockstarfit.com to schedule your free strategy session. As mentioned right up front, I'm thrilled to be bringing you one of our very special intensive episodes. Our expert guest for this show is Jason Stowell. Jason is a health and wellness consultant to JCCs of America. With over 24 years of experience, Jason has sold over 18,000 individual fitness agreements, making him one of the top sales performers in the health and wellness industry. Jason went on to further develop his unique approach to the sales process by creating the Empowered Fitness Sales System, delivered to fitness professionals today through various industry conferences and workshops. Over the next hour, Jason will walk you through the 7 pillars of predictable sales success. He breaks down each pillar into 3 sections, and they include an overview, an action, and a book recommendation. In fact, this episode alone contains a total of 8 book recommendations. And yes, the Amazon links are all in the show notes. Okay, here are my listening tips for today's bumper intensive show. Step number 1, listen to the episode in full. Step number 2, go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com and download the free ebook. Step number 3, listen again, this time with your ebook, and write down the actions that you're going to take. That is all you need to know. We're about to jump into today's episode, but first, thank you to our podcast partner, Team Rockstar Fit. Do you own a club or a studio? Are you missing out on nutrition solutions and online coaching tools for your clients? Well, here is your answer. Visit teamrockstarfit.com to schedule your free consultation. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to our special guest, Jason Stowell. Jason, I cannot tell you how absolutely thrilled we are to have you on the show today. Welcome to the Fitness Business Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's an incredible honor. Big fan of the show.
Now, today you're going to be sharing with us the 7 pillars of predictable sales success. But before we dive into those pillars, do you want to start off by just giving us a quick overview of what you're going to be talking to us about today?
Sure. The 7 pillars are something that I created and identified over the last 25 years. I've been an avid self-studier. I've read potentially hundreds of books and listened to thousands of podcasts. And what I found through those studies was that there's 7 commonalities to the really great sales presentations, regardless of industry. And so today I'm going to break those 7 down into sections of 3. So under each pillar, what you'll find is I have something called initial opportunity. It's something that your listeners can take back to their clubs and implement immediately. It's usually pretty simple and it's free. After that, I always give a seeking mastery tip. I always like to give something to those listeners who have been in the field for 10 plus years, who already have the 101 stuff memorized. I will also at the end give some actionable tips in addition to a book recommendation if any of your listeners happen to want to discover a little bit more about any specific pillar.
That sounds absolutely perfect. So you're going to start things off with section number 1, or I should say pillar number 1, which I believe is impressions. Talk to us about impressions.
That's correct. So the impressions, generally what we think of is we think of first impressions. Most of the time, sales professionals think that a first impression is a singular event. The reality of the situation, though, is a number of impressions, initial impressions, are going to add up to what we would call a buyer's belief, right? So, for example, your parking lot, the impression they get when they walk in through your front door, the lobby, the salesperson, right? There's a series of first impressions that you really want to intentionally design and consider when you're building out an elite process, right? So the first pillar is always understanding what exactly goes into establishing really great first impressions. And throughout the number of first impressions, we're going to go ahead and dive in a little bit onto each, right? So I like to frame these things at what I call the buyer's belief. The buyer's belief is essentially a number of observed traits or impressions that they've received from the tour of the facility or from working with any individual. So from the time that your prospects enter your club, again, there's going to be a series of first impressions that happen almost instantaneously, right? And once first impressions are formed, they become very difficult to break. As a matter of fact, we always say that the first impressions sets the future expectations, right? So if they happen to come in and tour your facility, let's say at 5 p.m., when it's particularly dirty and maybe by chance somebody had called off, so you're a little lightheaded, they don't know this, and what they're going to associate by seeing a facility that's a little bit on the dirtier side is that's what they should expect moving forward, right? So it's not an ideal first impression, but it is impactful, and it's really lasting. So it's important that we treat these impressions and we intentionally design our way of addressing them to maximize our abilities, our sales efforts. The interesting thing is most people think of first impressions as that handshake, right? You come to the desk, you shake their hand, you greet them, you're going to take them right on the tour, right? But what we know is that your first impression actually is your digital footprint, your webpage, your social media. I have a couple really, really cool stats that I'd like to share with your listeners. These come from a mix of Amazon and Google. We now know that 81% of people will research us online first before they ever even consider reaching out to us. And of those 81%, 47% need to digest 3 to 5 pieces of content first. So you need to be putting out constant content on your social media, social proof, different parties, celebrating different holidays, any specials you have going on, referral programs, all these things. You constantly need to be putting out updated content because your prospective members are seeing this before they ever reach out to you in the first place. Another fantastic stat that I love to tell people is that 88% of reviewers trust online reviews as much as they do their own trusted personal recommendations. So we should all be cultivating our winning stories, our success stories in our facilities, and asking them to write reviews on not just our website and our social media, but potentially going to other review sites and sharing them there. Because prospective buyers, again, unanimously are trusting these things as much as they would trust their best friend. It's fantastic. They're cumulative. It's really tremendous. Now, one other piece I want to talk about with your digital presence is that the speed and the quality of your web page are unbelievably important. If your web page loads in more than 2 seconds, you're losing opportunities. A matter of fact, after 3 seconds, 40% of the visitors who came to check out your offering will exit immediately after 40 seconds. And then the studies show, this is a Google stat, that every second after that, you lose 7 to 12% in your conversions. So it's super important that you're always creating fantastic, engaging content and that it's delivered in a quick and seamless process. Otherwise, they never even get to the front door for you to work with them on why they should be a member of your facility. So that's the first thing your listeners need to know is your digital footprint is the very first impression you have to work on. So I want to give your listeners a really quick, actionable tip around first impressions. Again, I'm going to assume that your listeners already know that they should be paying attention to their parking lot, their lobbies, how clean the bathrooms are, the consult area, and all this stuff, right? But one of the things I always recommend is you create a checklist that you would call exceptional experiences, right? We already have cleaning checklists. So on a daily basis, we'll walk around and just to make sure that everything is in the right place, right? Good systems are invisible. For example, nobody noticed that we have towels until we don't have towels. So by creating an exceptional experience checklist, what it allows our managers to do is to kind of spot check our staff. Are they dressed professionally? Are they modeling behavior that would say, for example, are they approachable? Do they conform to like they call the Disney 10-5 rule, right? Within 10 feet, you should be seeking eye contact. Within 5 feet, you should be greeting them, right? And the important tip with this exceptional experiences is just to make sure that when you see your staff modeling desirable behavior, that you just tell them they're doing a great job. My favorite way of framing that is to say that behavior that is recognized and rewarded is often repeated. So going on to seeking mastery. So one of the pieces I like to give for your more seasoned listeners is what I call the cognitive algebraic model of impression formation. It's really fascinating. So now depending on who you listen to, impressions form and are set anywhere from a tenth of a second all the way through to 27 seconds. They happen subconsciously, and they sum up instantaneously this weighted score of positive and negative traits, right? So the studies show that there's this very basic formula. Naturally, we always weight negative traits much higher than positive, right? So the formula that they use is for every singular positive trait, it would count as 1. And then for every observed negative trait, you would call that a 2, right? So if you seem warm and welcoming, that would be a 2, right? If you happen to have your shirt untucked and tattoos showing, that would actually be a -4. Right? So the basic formula is you take the number of your good traits times the number of your bad traits multiplied by 2, then you divide that and you get a score that's basically positive or negative. And that's how basically they sum up whether they have a good first impression of you or a negative first impression of you. It's not always fair. Again, you could have a bad day. You could have just came into work, all these different things. But this is how these impressions form, and they all matter. So some of the traits that I think is important to realize is you can chunk them in either central traits. These are the traits that are your big guys that the presence of or lack thereof usually indicate more traits. So for example, somebody finds you warm, that also usually means you're friendly, you're courteous, you're cheerful. The peripheral traits are the ones that are a little bit less impactful. So for example, if you would call me sarcastic, that doesn't necessarily imply that I'm a negative person, right? It's what we call peripheral traits. Many psychologists basically believe that there's 5 major traits that they use in this acronym OCEAN, right? So I'm going to give you a mastery tip here, an actionable item for your listeners to take who want to take this next step, right? And so what I call this is modeling the major traits of OCEAN. And OCEAN is the acronym for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And basically what that just means is you want to model that you are an adventurous, high energy, competent professional who's trusting, emotionally stable, and is listening intently to your listeners, right? So first impressions are what the observer sees. The mastery trip here is modeling the behavior of what would be called an ideal first impression. And then I want to follow it up real quick with just a basic book recommendation. So again, I've read hundreds, potentially 1,000 books at this point. And one of the best books I've read so far for impression formation is what's called Persuasion. And the author was Robert Cialdini. And it's really fantastic. And it talks about all the things that have to happen before you go to asking for the sale, setting the scene, if you will. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend your listeners check it out.
Jason, that was such a phenomenal start and a very good first impression, might I say. So we better move on to pillar number 2, which I believe is presence. Talk to us about the initial opportunity here.
Great. So if impressions was how they see you, presence is basically what you're radiating out, right? The hard fast rule is that the vast majority of communication is nonverbal. They like to say 7% verbal, 55% of your body language, and the other 38%, it really is just the tone. So there's 5 major components that basically make up one's presence. You would have like your professional appearance. For example, is your shirt tucked in? Is your hair combed? You're not wearing excessive jewelry. You're not an overabundance of cologne, if you will, right? With the second one being body language. Are you an open posture or are you in a closed posture? One of the things that go a little bit unaddressed is gesturing. Gesturing gives us a lot of information. It also relays a lot of information. For example, if you're nodding when you're saying something, you're essentially giving a nonverbal cue that you would like them to agree with you on different things. One of the fascinating pieces with body language and tone is silence. Silence actually gives us a lot of information, right? So when I'm talking to somebody and they're silent, if they're leaning forward and they're making eye contact, I know that they're invested and they're listening. If they're silent, but they're looking away, slouching in the chair, right? That tells us that they're not interested in what we're talking about, right? So body language would be your second component in presence. Facial expressions. A lot of people call the face the index of the mind. The eyes are especially effective for indicating attention and interest. The fourth component there would be the paralinguistics, which are basically your tone, your volume, your cadence, right? Fun fact with that is that everybody kind of arrives at a conversation at different cadences and volumes, right? What happens is the person who is more established or an expert in the topic at hand is what you would call setting the tone, right? And in sales, we'd like to call it pacing and leading conversations. By pacing and leading a conversation, you basically start to inspire and move them along a specific path of, say, improved health outcomes if they're willing to listen to you, right? And then the last one is just proxemics, or basically proximity. And I'm always fascinated by the ones that really don't have an appreciation for this piece, right? So we know that your public space would be 12 to 15 feet, right? A social distance, for example, with a distant friend would maybe be 4 feet or so. Personal distance, if I'm with my brother, maybe within 4 feet. And then that intimate distance is within 18 feet. I like to say that comfort levels can be created and destroyed instantaneously. So when I have a close talker, I'm immediately turned off. It doesn't even matter what you're saying anymore. But the fact that you're just right up in my business just really kind of sets the tone of like, I don't want to be part of this whole thing. So it's just a fascinating piece. So I want to give your listeners an actionable tip around this whole presence piece, right? The very first thing I want them to start working with is by varying the intensity of their voice during role play, right? So an example, in the beginning, when you're first meeting with somebody, you may take on the tone of a therapist. You're listening, you're asking questions, right? But when I'm about to tell you about all the positive things that we're going to do to change your life, I sound like a game-winning coach, right? My cadence goes up, my volume goes up, my tone gets a little bit higher, right? I'm trying to inspire you to believe that we can manifest change in your life, right? And so that would be my actionable tip for your immediately go home and try this at your club. So for the seeking mastery piece, I call it state management. So for the listeners that are familiar with NLP, which would stand for your neuro-linguistic programming, essentially it's this internal emotional states. And we know that negative states can be debilitating. So for example, in poker, we call it tilting. In baseball, we call it in slumps, right? If you miss a sale, right, you take one of your tours or you're working with one of your personal training clients and they don't sign up, that can actually have a negative impact on the future opportunities. And you just start missing everything like that, right? So state management is basically recognizing that there's ways you can take control of your emotional state, right? One of the ways is what we call anchoring. Now, anchoring can be something like a smell, a touch. It could be working out. For example, there's movies where in Gladiator, the Russell Crowe reaches down, grabs the dirt, rubs it between his hands before he goes into battle. He does that to kind of prime himself that he's about to enter a state, a heightened state to be effective, right? So anchoring yourself is a really great way to prepare yourself to not let your last opportunity or missed opportunity affect your next opportunity. So again, I highly recommend for an actionable tip for your your seasoned listeners is to develop a morning ritual, right? To create state management, to create a winning mindset in the morning, right? Tony Robbins uses meditation and workout. Jeffrey Gitmore likes to write and read. Even myself, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is listen to a motivational video or audio. And then I follow that up with a podcast or an audiobook. And so I encourage all of your listeners to make sure that they have a morning ritual that is consistent and primes them for success throughout their day. So my book recommendation for presence would be the book called NLP, The Essential Guide. The authors are Tom Hubior and Tom Dotz and Susan Sanders. It's a fantastic book for really understanding internal imaging, positive self-talk, and framing yourself for success. I highly recommend it for your readers.
Excellent recommendation. And I've got to say, Jason, I'm sitting here so excited because just in the first 10 minutes of the interview, you've already given us 2 amazing tips that we can action straight away, 2 fantastic books to check out. And I have to just support what you were saying in relation to finding that anchor when it comes to really setting the scene and setting ourselves up for success, and also your recommendation on a morning ritual. And you'll be interested to hear, and probably not surprised because I know that you're an avid listener of the show, but so many of the leaders that come on the show, that have been on the show as a guest, talk about having this morning ritual and having the way that they start the day to set themselves up for success. So I just wanted to support what you said. And for any of the FBP family out there that don't already have some type of ritual, some way to start their day, then now's a great time to embrace that. We're at the beginning of the new year, and it's a really fantastic opportunity to really find out the difference between what happens on a day when you set yourself up and you do those little rituals, whether it's a learning ritual or it's an exercise ritual, no matter what it is. What happens on a day like that versus in a day when you just go straight into your emails and your social media and everything just becomes, one task after the other. So perhaps have a little bit of a test and experiment a little bit about how that sets your day up. So we have covered the first 2 pillars, Jason. Talk to us about pillar number 3, storytelling.
So storytelling is so powerful. When you're presenting information, we like to say that facts tell, but stories sell. The National Enquirer is the most widely purchased publication in the world because facts aren't nearly as compelling as stories, right? So I always tell my employees, anyone who comes to any of my conferences or my shows, that you always want to make sure that the person you're sitting across from is the hero of their story, right? Now, an important first step that has to happen before you can really tell their story to them, right? You need to have a sound needs analysis. I don't know how often I see a prospective member will come into the club. They'll fill out the tour form or the needs analysis, essentially to kind of buy time until the membership consultant comes to the front desk. And then the membership consultant will grab the tour form, see that you checked off the pool, see that you checked off the treadmill, and they'll immediately start walking to those ways. And what happens is you rob them and you rob yourself of truly understanding what's driving them, what's really getting them through the doors, right? We call it the X factor. So if I ask somebody, why did you want to join a club? They may say, I want to lose 20 pounds. Now, you might be able to look at them and say, well, yeah, I totally agree. You need to lose 20 pounds, right? But really, you want to hear in their own words what the emotional reason is why they want to lose those 20 pounds, right? So when they say, I want to lose 20 pounds, essentially what they're saying is that's the symptom to the problem. The problem might actually be, I have my anniversary coming up, and I'd really like to fit into the same clothing I could have fit into when I was married, right? So make sure you do a solid needs analysis and truly understand the emotional reason why they're there. And that's going to be my first actionable tip, right? Once you understand and truly know what's driving them to come into your facility, everything else you do from that point is going to circle back to how we're going to get them ready for that. So when I was personal training, one of the first things one of my favorite session types I used to offer was for couples. It was a couples conditioning class around weddings, right? And so what I would say is you're 6 months out from your wedding date. I'll give you a half-hour session with spouse A and a half-hour session with spouse B, and we'll do a 1-hour session together. And most of the content of the conversation will be around the wedding, right? What kind of music are we going to listen to? Is it going to be an open bar? Is crazy Uncle Harry coming to the deal, right? So it's really important that you establish these stories with these people. So again, with that couples conditioning, if you're going to the why, everything comes back to getting them ready for their wedding. Everything that we do, his session, her session, the combined session, will be under the umbrella of getting ready for your wedding. But at the same time, the why they there is to actually achieve those results, right? So make sure you're identifying this emotional factor that's driving them. Now, going back to the storytelling, when we're talking about the seeking mastery point of it, there's something called the monomyth. The monomyth is basically this overarching story where the hero sets out on this difficult journey. They move from familiar to the unfamiliar territory, right? There's a evil, good versus evil, an unknown versus a familiar kind of thing, right? And as we talked about, stories are very powerful. Stories trigger emotions. And when we feel emotions, we become very much less critical and are much more open to being inspired. So one of the studies I like to point to that really support the power of storytelling is the eBay experiment back from 2006 by the New York Times author Rob Walker, right? So Rob Walker called what he called it a significant object study. He purchased 200 items for approximately $1.25 each, and then he found 200 authors and asked them if they'd be willing to write a story about each one of these objects. And here's what he found. He paid a total of $197 for these items. He sold them for almost $8,000. The only difference was he added stories to each of these listings, right? And that just shows you how powerful this storytelling piece is, right? How many times have you watched Batman and then you come out of the movie and you're like, oh, absolutely, I'm Batman now. I'm going to go jump around my couch and do all these different things, and my wife can't stand me because I'm doing this, this crazy, like, I'm Batman, right? So storytellings are just so important and powerful that you need to make sure that you're telling your clients the story of how they're going to start with you, what the journey is going to look like, and what tomorrow is going to accomplish, right? And so that actually leads into our mastery tip here, right? There's something called spark lines. Nancy Durante is famous. She did a famous TED Talk called The Secret Structures of Great Talks. And what she found was that the greatest speeches of all times basically shared the same formula, where they talked about the where we are versus the ideal future, right? What is and what could be. For example, Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech, right? And so spark lines is essentially a way of inspiring through the storytelling of this is your present state, and this is our potential future state. So again, when I was doing personal training, what we would talk about is, again, establishing that, listen, this is your story. You're going to be the hero of your own story. And what we choose to do today is going to change your life for the positive, or the lack of what we do may not, right? And so Spark Lines allows me to go in and say, here's what we've done. I've worked with thousands of clients before you. I know that this isn't going to be easy, but if you're willing to invest in the time with me, I will invest in the time with you. And tomorrow, what we're going to achieve is going to be great, right? And so I have a book recommendation as well for anyone who would be interested in getting better with storytelling, is The Start With Why by the author Simon Sinek. And everyone probably knows that point at this time, but it's crucial that we focus on the fundamentals of storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Jason. And what a great story that you just shared with us in regards to that eBay purchasing items for $197 and then adding a story to the sales process and then selling for over $8,000. I think I'm going to need to grab that link because I would love to read some more about that. And as you were talking, another book came to my mind, which I would love to share with all of the FBP family. If you haven't yet read this, then do yourself a favor and check it out. It's called Building a Story Brand, and the author is Donald Miller, one of the best books I've read in regards to storytelling and how you can actually build a story around your business brand. Have you read that one, Jason?
I haven't read that one yet. Actually.
Well, that's probably the only book you haven't read. I think you've read most of them.
I refuse to read books anymore without recommendations. So thank you.
Well, there's my recommendation. So yeah, I do recommend that, and I support what you said about Start With Why. I also just want to take a minute to do a quick plug for an interview that we did back in 2018, I think it was, and it was with Peter Docker. Now, Peter Docker co-authored Find Your Why, and Find Your Why was the follow-up book to Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And the difference is same principle, but Find Your Why is actually a practical guide of something that you can use or you can use with your team to go through the process of finding your why. So it's a really good follow-up book to Start With Why. And we had the opportunity to interview Peter Docker right here on the show. So I'm going to add the link to that book as well and that interview so that you guys can go ahead and take a listen. So Jason, we've worked through the first 3 pillars. Let's move on to pillar number 4. Tell us about peak end rule. Before we hear about pillar number 4 from Jason, I first want to tell you quickly about an amazing closed Facebook community that you all need to be in. It's called the Active Management Facebook Community, and it allows you to connect with fitness owners and managers from across the globe. You can find it at facebook.com/groups/active management community. I'm a member of the community, and I can tell you it is a highly engaging group of members. I am always amazed at the content that is shared. There is a monthly expert to answer your questions. There's photos from inside gyms, reasons to exercise, a monthly book club, and even ideas under $50. It is free and it's an awesome community. So make sure that you check it out and go ahead and join. Go to facebook.com/groups/active management community. Now back to Jason, where he's going to tell us about the peak end rule.
All right, excellent. So this is probably the first one that maybe most of your listeners will not be familiar with, right? So the peak end rule is basically a psychological heuristic in which people judge an experience largely based on how they felt at its best moment, at its worst moment, and how it ended, and how it basically began, if you will. So the experience is judged on the sum of those experiences. Interesting enough, people suffer from something called duration neglect. And a good example of that, let's just say that you went to a concert, one of your favorite performers were there, right? You generally will remember looking back a month ago or a week ago, how you got there. You remember the best moments from the concert. You may remember any of the worst moments, like waiting in line for the bathroom. And you basically remember how the concert ended, right? You could have been there for 6 hours, but recalling that memory, you may only have a few moments of content, right? So the peak end rule is basically establishing that the most important aspects of any singular experience, again, it's going to be the beginning, the end, the best, and the worst, right? So now how can we leverage that in our facilities, right? And what I like to tell people is to add something called tour stops, all right? So tour stops essentially are where you want to travel to or where you want your staff to go to best show off the best locations of your facility, your unique value propositions, your competitive advantages. And it also helps you to avoid any pitfall moments, right? So let's say you could take path A to the locker room or path B. And path B might be undesirable because it's right next to the bathroom or a very loud spinning class, and you know that there's an older client that probably doesn't want that type of experience, where somebody who's into spinning might absolutely love it, right? So by adding tour stops, it allows you to intentionally design your facility. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. When I go into a club, one of the first things I do is I have them tour me around their own facility, and then afterwards, I actually take them around and I tour them back through their own facility. And one of the things I always look for is called lines of sight. What you'll find is that most membership fitness consultants, if you will, they'll take you through a location, like say your group X room, in the path of least resistance, right? From door to door. And what I like to tell people is you got to remember, this is their first experience. You may have seen this pool 1,000 times, but it's the first time they're seeing this pool, right? So now if your marketing department wouldn't take a photo from where you're giving the pitch on the information now, you shouldn't stop there either. And so what I'll do is I'll go in, I'll take a little bit of red tape, and I'll put a little X on the floor. And I'll say, listen, is this a much better position to show off how amazing this room is, or is where you stopped where everything looks smaller and cramped, and potentially it's where everyone was kind of working out, right? So I'll add this tape, right? And so my first actionable tip for your audience is to go through your facility and make sure you find these tour stops. Now, the really good clubs actually intentionally design these standing banners that basically have the features, right? So we know we want to talk about benefits for the most part, right? A lot of people know that the treadmill has 1,000 different settings, but really they just want to know that they're going to be able to lose weight doing it, right? And so by adding these stands about the characteristics, that the pool is set at 84 degrees, it's 3.5 feet deep, it's considered a therapy pool. These things on the banner now allow us to speak more about the benefits of the pool, while the signage will talk a little bit about the features. And so I always recommend that we have a dedicated prospective members experience and a members experience, right? And so by adding these tour stops, we essentially are able to script out prospective members experiences to allow us to best position our facility for those first impressions, right? I always like to say, well, we talked about the peaks and the pitfalls, right? So I was at a facility recently where they had this fantastic landing from the first floor to the second floor. And what they did was they specifically scripted a tour stop right on this landing. And they talked about, basically racquetball and, we've got 400 different X, Y's, and Z's, yada, 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 right? None of that was actually relevant. The reason they scripted the stop right there was because they know that the prospective member was looking out over this vast kingdom of equipment, and they're just being impressed upon, wow, I cannot believe how cool this is. I want to be a part of this, right? And so that would be called a peak moment or a wow moment, if you will. You want to avoid the pitfalls we talked about. So, for example, a pitfall might be somewhere where the gym is constantly dirty. Your staff is leaving their bags and their paperwork and their lunches and things like that, right? An undesirable place that you wouldn't want to take somebody there, right? A dirty gym basically erodes value. That would be a dud. Dirty shirt erodes value. Dust, scuffs paint, fuzzy TVs, wires hanging down behind these televisions. These things all erode value. They'd be dud moments. And you want to try to avoid those things by either eliminating them or just avoiding them on your tours, right? So again, my first actionable tip there is to make sure that you are checking out your peaks, your pitfalls, and ends. So how are they greeted? What is going to be the best feature moment of your club? Where can you eliminate any of these bad, poor pitfall moments? And then how are you going to ask them for their business at the end? Not every moment has to be amazing, as long as some of them are. That's most important. So now going into seeking the mastery tip, right? This is something that I've done, again, often on my site visits, and I call it heat mapping. Generally, the tour is the most neglected portion of any kind of professional development. We spend a lot of time on scripts. We spend a lot of time on handling objections. But essentially what happens is they just go. Somebody said they're interested in the pool, so they're just going to go to the pool. Somebody said they're interested in the hot tub, they just go to the hot tub, right? So heat mapping essentially is we are going to take what their interests are specifically and map that over our unique value propositions or our competitive advantages, right? So, for example, everyone's going to see the pool. You might not have said that you're interested in the pool, but the pool is a huge value add on hot days, right? Or in the winter, right? Not everybody is going to see the calipers. If you didn't tell me that weight loss and losing inches and body fat was a big thing, you're not going to see that. But if you told me initially that that was something that was important to you, then absolutely that'll be part of the tour, right? So I always recommend that don't give these Gilligan tours, right, where you're out there for 3 hours and you're talking about everything. It's called feature bombing, right? It's overwhelming. And certainly don't give these point and click tours where you said you only wanted to see X, Y, and Z, Jason. I never bothered to show you the pool because you didn't say you wanted to see the pool, right? The heat map essentially is the combination of both those things. And so again, my mastery tip here would be to make sure you create optimal lines of sight. And again, going back, if marketing wouldn't take a photo from that location to show it off, you shouldn't be stopping there and pitching the benefits of that area either. So following up with the book recommendation, this is actually my favorite book. Of all the books I've ever read, this is by far my favorite book. I actually gift it out when I'm on my site visits. And it's called The Power of Moments by Dan and Chip Heath. And I can't say enough about it. It really is just fantastic. Everyone should read it. I don't care what you do.
Great recommendation. And I have to say, as you were describing, just going back to that initial opportunity and you were talking about tour stops, as you were describing getting to a certain place in our club and maybe having a banner that had all of the features or talked a little bit about the pool or whatever it might be, in my head, I was thinking about the experience that we have if we go to an art gallery or if we go to an exhibition. Same type of thing. You might get to something that they want featured, and then they're going to have some information about that particular piece of artwork or sculpture or whatever it might be. I love that idea of the tour stops and just really creating that experience for the prospect, and also supporting our sales team when they're doing that walk around by giving them those really key features of that particular space or that particular area within our facility. So excellent advice and great tip for us all to have a look at what that walkthrough looks like. So let's move on now to pillar number 5, which is nudges. I am fascinated to hear all about nudges. Starting off with the initial opportunity, what have you got for us, Jason?
So a nudge essentially is a model for change management. Essentially, it's a positive or negative reinforcement, like a prod or a coax or just a gentle push. Essentially, an indirect suggestion that influences the behaviors and decision making. So, for example, your vending machine might be on the first floor, right? And we want people to start using the stairs. So we put the vending machine on the second floor. We don't necessarily have to tell them why we did this, but now they travel a different path. And by traveling a different path, they're exposed to different opportunities, different signages, maybe creating more connection and community with employees that are on the second floor that they wouldn't have seen otherwise, right? So that would be an example of a nudge. There's different ways to create nudging as well. Essentially, a nudge has to be a motivator that doesn't substantially change the outcome, right? So if I said something like, buy today and save $100, that wouldn't be a nudge, right? A nudge is more of, I want you to eat healthier, so I put a bowl of fruit in the middle of the table, essentially kind of encouraging you to do that, right? There are other types of nudges would be like creating a sense of scarcity, using colors. Like you could put the word stop over a green dot, but people are still going to see go, right? And same thing with red. You could say go on a red dot, but essentially people are going to want to stop, right? So creating status, choosing the words. The word how is much better received than the word but. No matter what you say after a but, it's almost always a negative kind of reaction to this, right? And one of the more powerful ones are the uses of incentives and loss aversion, right? So maybe your base monthly membership dues are, let's just call it $75 a month, right? But you give them a quick action bonus today if they decide to purchase. And there's a loss aversion that if they don't act now, they won't also get the free gym bag, right? So if you can use incentives and the aversion to this loss in addition to your monthly dues, they're powerful motivators. And again, they're nudges, right? The monthly rate is the same. It's just the incentives are there differently. A good example of a nudge would be like IKEA. You know, IKEA has these unbelievably large facilities, and they have footsteps that kind of tell you where to go. At any point, you could decide you just want to go to the bedroom section. You don't have to go to the living rooms. But because of the steps, everyone just kind of follows along the path, right? You don't have to, but you're nudged to do so. Another good nudge, example of a nudge, would be like having candy at the cash register. They're not telling you have to buy the candy at the cash register, but it's only $1 and you're on your way out the door, right? So just grab it. Nudges can also be sensory, like smells. We know that the smell of baking bread just generally makes people hungry. Music always seems to trigger emotions, right? So you hear a sad song, your mood kind of gets lower. But if you have something more energy, people want to get up and they want to start moving, right? Natural sunlight is always more desirable than darkness when it comes to creating this environment of health and wellness, right? So different things that we can use for nudges would be like social proof, right? So you should always be telling your clients stories, always be telling your success stories. Now, a fun tip here though, social proof only works when it looks like the person who is looking for that solution, right? So if all you've trained is athletes and you have a woman in front of you who wants to lose weight, that social proof doesn't do anything that. So make sure you're cultivating varying different types of social proof. And so my actionable tip here real quick is just to optimize your consult space, right? So whenever you bring a client in or a prospective member in to talk to them about the experiences they're about to have in your facility, make sure it's clean, make sure it's clear clutter, make sure there's maybe a motivational quote about change, make sure there's a picture of somebody working out. Get rid of all the garbage, get rid of your junk food, all these different things, right? Make sure that the space is nudging them to believe that change happens here. And so when we're talking about seeking mastery, this is going to be a real quick one. I like to call it priming prospects. And it goes back to NLP, right? Essentially, you're trying to get them to a state where they believe that change can happen with you and can happen here, right? And so my tip for seeking mastery is something I call the fresh start effect. And we're all very familiar with fresh starts, whether we know it or not, right? New Year's Eve, everyone says, I'm starting the gym January 1st, right? Mondays are always a great fresh start. Old me drank too much this weekend. New me on Monday, though, is changing the world, right? They always start after like milestones like your birthday. So fresh starts are these really interesting psychological pieces that drive people into change. We can trigger fresh starts in conversations with our clients by basically, again, going back to spark lines. Like, this is where we are today. But this is where we can be tomorrow if you're willing to start anew. Wash your hands of all these poor behaviors that got you into this less than desirable wellness piece. And tomorrow, we're going to begin this journey that ultimately is going to achieve and realize your goals and dreams, right? And so to follow this whole section up with a book recommendation, really famous book called Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wellness, and Happiness, was really one of the first books that really kind of pushed this movement to nudging in your facilities. And the authors are Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein.
Another fantastic pillar, Jason. Thank you so much. And one of the things you mentioned in there was the importance of not using the word but when we're talking to our prospects and our clients. And it reminded me of an interview that I did with Michelle Bowden. It was some time ago. It was actually back in 2016. And that episode was called Using Presentation and Communication Skills to Connect with Your Clients, Members, and Teams. And I bring that to everyone's attention because if you didn't catch that episode a couple of years ago, then I highly recommend that you go and take a listen. I'll pop the link in the show notes. But one of the things that we talked about is she tells us why we shouldn't use the word but in our conversations and what words that we should use instead. So that's a great one to jump over to a little bit later on if you guys haven't heard that one just yet. So we are making our way through these 7 pillars. We've just got 2 to go. So number 6, Jason, is professional rapport. Talk to us about the initial opportunity here.
This is one of the most widely misunderstood pieces inside of our facilities. People always mistake professional rapport for rapport, right? We have to be more than just likable, right? So when I ask a personal trainer, for example, what sets you apart from another personal trainer, the general answer is, I don't know that I'm any better than them, but I'm really good at building relationships. Okay, well, that's an expectation, not a perk, right? So professional rapport is essentially being friendly and being an expert. And the way you define yourself as an expert is by using what I call your expert's lingo, right? So your initial opportunity, your actionable item, is to come up with 3 to 5 statements that basically explain to you why they should listen to you. Why are you an expert? Do you have a specific certification or a specific experience that makes you somebody of note, somebody that they should listen to inform them on how they should change their behavior, right? So we're going to go into the seeking mastery part of this, right? There's something that was really fascinating. It was Aristotle's modes of persuasion, right? And one of my favorite quotes is from Steve Jobs. And essentially it is, selling is about relationships. First I sell myself, then Apple, then the product, right? And so what he basically is saying is that you have to establish these 3 things in order. And Aristotle called those ethos, pathos, and logos. Again, we're not going to deep dive into this stuff here, but essentially what it means is that they have to believe that you are a notable figure in the field of question. You have to be an expert so that they believe that you know what you're talking about, right? You just demonstrate mastery of terminology. Pathos is, are you able to leverage and emotionally appeal to them, really drive them? That not only are you an expert, but you are passionate about changing this, right? And essentially logos is the actual argument, the actual script, the actual piece, right? Are you making a compelling reason why? So you're an expert, you're an expert that's passionate, and you make a solid, airtight argument to do that. So again, when you're, we'll say personal training, right? I would always establish that, I've been training for 25 years. I've helped many people doing this. I love what I do. None of this feels like work, right? And here's how we're going to do it. And I've done it 1,000 times before, right? So my tip for those clients, this would be a mastery tip, and actually this would be a good tip for anybody, is to use something called the specific edge pyramid. The specific edge pyramid was created by Mike Ween. And essentially what it is you take the 3 things about yourself, your business, and your solution, and you merge them together to come up with this blended brand, if you will, right? So I've been in fitness for 25 years. That would be one corner of my pyramid, if you will. But plenty of professionals have been in fitness for 25 years. That doesn't weed me out. Little known fact is I actually went to school to be a high school history teacher, right? So teacher's education was something else that would make me a little bit more specific, right? So you take the 25 years of fitness, you take the fact that I went to school to be a teacher, and I like to consider myself able to speak up and down the social spectrum, if you will. But there's plenty of people who have done that. So what is that third piece, right? And by putting those 3 things together, you get that peak, you get that unique thing that makes your value unique. And you should be doing that for yourself. You should be doing that for your business, and you should be doing that for your solution. And my final book recommendation there is The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey. Fantastic book.
And a super popular recommendation, I have to say. So once again, we'll pop that one in the show notes. So we've nearly covered off all of our 7 pillars. We're now moving on to the final one, which is the ask. So talk us through this one, Jason. We're about to hear about pillar number 7 from Jason, but first is a message from our friends at Tribe Team Training. Are you interested in increasing your center's income and your trainer's income from small group training? Tribe Team Training is the new way to get more members engaged in small group training and paying extra. Click the Tribe Team Training link in the show notes or go to tribeteamtraining.com.au/podcast for your free formula to see how much income you can make from small group training. Now back to Jason to hear about pillar number 7.
So the ask is essentially the part that everyone thinks they want to know about. Anytime I go to a club, it's always, Jason, what are the scripts I should be using? And how should I be closing? How do I handle objections? So let me first frame that if you're getting a lot of objections at the end of your tours, it's because you're not building enough value, right? They still believe that the problems, the unanswered questions, outweigh what you've already shown them, right? So the ask essentially is, how are we going to invite them to make a buying decision, if you will? And I like to use something called value-based selling from a top-down approach. And there's many advantages to doing this way. The instinctual way of pitching rates generally is to start with your base experience, your cheapest experience, and then when they buy in, to upsell them, right? The challenge is if you do get them to buy in, upselling is a whole nother tedious process of trying to build additional value, right? So let me tell you why, and this is going to be the first homework piece, actionable tip for your listeners, is to always try to sell your packages from the top down. Call your top package, that's the most inclusive package, your base package. That should be your base package, not your premium package, right? And the advantage to doing it that way is that when somebody says to you, Jason, the facility's fantastic, I just don't know that I can fit this in my price range, it gives you an opportunity to work with them and to say, we value your business. I never want somebody to not be able to join because they can't afford this. Do you need racquetball privileges? Do you need a towel service? If you don't need these things, we have another tier of membership that might be a little bit more digestible for you and to invite you to join with us today. How does that sound, right? That's a whole different approach than trying to upsell somebody from the basement, if you will, right? So again, the actual tip there is to reframe that your top tier option is your base membership option, all right? So when we talk about seeking mastery, I like to talk about buyer scripts. Everyone talks about their scripts from themselves, right? Now, scripts don't have to be substantial to be effective. Good example. You go through McDonald's drive-thru and they say, would you like to upsize that? You say no, right? Well, when you say no, they don't come back and be like, Jason, hold on, let me tell you this. You're going to get 30% more French fries for only 25 cents, right? They don't try to overcome the objection, right? They just give you a minor script. They know simply by asking, they're going to increase sales, right? So there's buyer scripts that you need to, like the professionals, our mastery, our top tier salespeople should be focusing on. Everyone is so afraid to ask, like, do you want to join today? It's like this, like in high school, you're passing the note across the table, like, do you like me? Circle yes or no, right? This fear of rejection, right? There's actually only 7 different possible replies they could come back with. The first one would be acceptance. So yeah, let's do this, right? The one that everyone fears, number 2, would be rejection. And rejection only really happens on cold calls, or if you try to interrupt somebody on the street. That's the only time where they'll really tell you that cold, like, get away from me, I'm not doing this stuff, right? An objection is something that can be overcome with powerful scripts. You may receive the 4th one, which is just a negotiation. Jason, I will join today if you can do this for me. And maybe you can, maybe you can't, right? A question, just a clarifier. Those are good things. That means they're still interested in learning more information about your facility. They may give you the 6, which is a condition. Basically, it's a demand statement. Jason, I will join today if you have a saltwater pool. You either can do it or you can't do it, right? It's a condition. And the 7th reply that you could possibly get after asking somebody to join today is a stall. And a stall is just basically a mask for one of the other 6 pieces, right? So your master trainers, your master fitness consultant, your master membership consultants should recognize that there's only 7 possible outcomes and how they can maneuver those things, right? So again, developing over time is to understand and leverage your buyer scripts. After 18,000 sales at this point, the process is a lot more similar than it is not, right? And so you don't have to go into every needs analysis and every tour and every fitness consult as unique pieces, right? Everyone's story is going to be unique, but there's going to be commonalities into what they want to achieve. So again, you should be perfecting, understanding, driving these 7 pitch replies and how to retort these things. And so my book recommendation here, and again, one of my really favorite books, and a previous guest, I believe, on your show, was Objections, The Art and Science of Getting Past No by Jeb Blunt. Fantastic book. Highly recommend it.
You have just recommended one of my favorite books and one of my favorite authors. And you are so right. As you were talking there, I just had a quick search, a Google search, to check out what his show number was. And Jeb was with us on episode 231 back on May 2019. And it was called Objections, How to Become Rejection Proof. It's one of my favorite books. So I'm so glad that was in your list of book recommendations for today. So Jason, I am blown away by all of the incredible information that you have shared. And I have to let everyone in on a little bit of a secret that you told me at the beginning, because you normally spend 2 days presenting this information, and I have just really put the pressure on it and asked you to get it out in 1 hour. So we just want to say thank you so much for condensing this information and sharing it with you. There is so much here that I feel will be of super value to the FBP family. I mean, I've been crazily writing notes as you've been going through, and I was just taking a quick look, and the things that, you know, I just love were things like the exceptional experience checklist that you talked about right at the very beginning. I absolutely loved when you talked about the tour stops and putting those features about each particular highlight on the tour to really support our sales team. So before we wrap up today, Jason, were there any last words of advice that you want to share with the FBP family?
Get your pen ready now for Keep Me's Fit Bizpiration.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that. If it wasn't obvious, I love this stuff. None of this feels like work to me. And so I could have gone on forever. So thank you all for bearing with me as I rambled through quickly. One of the big takeaways I just want to make sure to give your listeners is to make sure that you have established a routine every morning. You had touched on that as well, but it's so important to set yourself up for a mindset of success every morning. And that will allow you to achieve whatever it is, manifest whatever success you want in life. So if I had one piece I'd like everyone to take away from this, is have an established morning ritual or routine that sets you up to be effective. That's going to change your life. It's going to change others' lives around you. And I can't say enough, that is by far the most important piece of this.
Keep Me, Smarter Member Retention. keepme.ai.
I love that, Jason. Thank you so much. And just before we do wrap up, tell us if people want to get in touch with you and they'd like more information, given that they now know that we've condensed 2 days into 60 minutes, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I always love connecting with people on LinkedIn. That'll be in the show notes. They can find the specific address there. So again, I would encourage everyone to reach out to me there. I always answer every question I get. It might take me a day or so, but please, I love this stuff. It's fun for me, and I'm always looking to connect with like-minded individuals.
That is brilliant, and you are so right. Of course, I will put the link in today's show notes. So, Jason, thank you so much for, first of all, being a long-time listener of the show and now being one of our expert guests on the show. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Enormous honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Jason. Now, here's a message from our friends at Jim Sales. Jim Sales allows you to plan, implement, and monitor a proactive sales strategy that's automated and uniform. You can give your sales team the tools they need to capture, nurture, and convert new members, which means it's easier than ever before to grow your member base. Make sure you head over to jimsales.net to find out more information. Another huge thank you to Jason, and a reminder that in addition to the podcast, you can also download an ebook of today's intensive show. Just go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com, click on the tab at the top of the page called Intensive, then scroll down and press the button that says Access the ebook of this interview. It is that easy. Now, don't forget that we've also got a huge library of intensive courses. Topics include sales, financial management, how to start your own YouTube channel, video essentials, how to start your online personal training business, onboarding a new employee, building a retention plan, and much, much more. You can find all of those episodes and their ebooks at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. I would love to hear what you thought of our latest show today. Please email me at any time at chantal@fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Now, one last thing before I sign off. Did you remember to join the Active Management community? If not, then now is the time. Go to facebook.com/groups/active management community, and I will see you there. Until next time, what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into lives of others.